So before we get into this video, I just want to address something really quickly. I'm not saying that Kamala Harris will win in a landslide. I'm saying let's look at some of the data to determine if it's going to be a good night for Kamala Harris. And it could be possibly a blue wave based on some of the data we see, but still, make sure you vote, make sure you're registered, make sure if you're voting by mail that you know all the rules, you fill out the ballot correctly, you have your signature, you have your witness if it's required, and submit that ballot. Make sure you have all the rules correct, because the Republicans will do everything they can to throw out every single mail ballot that has the slightest discrepancy in it. So just be aware of that. I recommend voting in person because you just put that ballot right in there. And if you make a mistake with the ballot, you can just go over to the people and get a new one. But still, if you're voting by mail, be very careful and know the rules. But vote, okay? But with that being said, I want to look at some of the data that we have regarding this election and talk about how things are aligning for Kamala Harris that look real positive, especially when we compare it to previous elections and previous wins by Democrats. So let's go ahead and delve into this data. I am going to use some real clear politics numbers. Now, I just want to let you know right off the bat that I'm only using these real clear politics numbers as averages to just kind of give you an idea of where things are. I'm not using them for predictive models or any of the other things. Just show, hey, there is a certain average at this time. That's it. So let's go ahead and delve into these things that we're going to talk about, which are these keys that actually show that Kamala Harris might be in a good position. Now, the first thing is approval ratings, and Kamala Harris is above water with her approval rating. And when Democrats are usually above water with their approval rating, they win elections. So let's go ahead and look at the most recent approval ratings at this time in the election throughout the previous elections. And as you can see, Kamala Harris is, according to Real Clear Politics right now, up by 0.3%, which is small, but she is still above water. As you can see, Joe Biden was up 3.1% at this time in the last election. Now, Hillary Clinton, if people want to know why Hillary Clinton lost the election, there you go. There's your answer right there. Hillary Clinton had a negative 13.4. She was way underwater with her approval ratings. Barack Obama, he was up 6.5 in his second term. So people looked at him favorably. And obviously in 2008, we have him up by 18%. Now remember, there's a difference between approval rating and favorability rating. So, and I might have just said approval, but approval means approving of the job you are doing. So if you're not the president, we really can't ask about your approval rating of being the president if you're not the president. Now, people might ask of an approval rating of Kamala Harris as vice president, but usually favorability ratings are based on whether you like somebody or not. So just wanted to put that little disclaimer out there. Now, the next number I want to talk about might be a big surprise to people, but the closer and closer you get to 50%, the more likely you're actually going to win the election. And since 2004, over the last 20 years, at this time in the election, we have never had a candidate be over 50% of the popular vote in a nationwide election. Even Barack Obama, back in 2008, he was lower than where Kamala Harris is right now at the same point. So let's go ahead and look at those numbers. And as you can see, Kamala Harris right now is at 49.1, which is nearly about where Joe Biden was last time. As you see, Hillary Clinton was at 47.4, Barack Obama at 48.9, but in his first run for the office, he was at 47.9 at this exact time in the election. And as you can see, John Kerry was significantly lower, 43.4. So as you can see, when we get into those lower ranges, chances are the Democrats aren't going to win. Look at John Kerry, and that election with John Kerry was supposed to be considered a close election, and it kind of was, actually. Not totally, but enough. So you can see that Kamala Harris at this point in the election is actually doing better than Barack Obama did in 2008, which was a blowout election. She's doing essentially as well as Joe Biden, that, you know, even though some of the states were close, he won the election. So this is a really good trend for Kamala Harris that we're seeing her get high in these numbers. Now, before I get into my last point, I do want to make two announcements. The first announcement is that if you like this channel, please subscribe to it. It'd be great to have you on board. Most people who come here are not subscribed, so please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. That would be great. The second thing that I want to mention is that we are doing funding for a poll to work with St. Pete Polls in order to do a poll of the 13th Congressional District in Florida, which is Pinellas County, a big possible swing district that if the Democrats win that, they're going to have an excellent night on election night. And it is very possible that they could win that. So it is being crowdfunded. Please, the link is down below. If you'd like to just give 5, 10, 15, or whatever, every little bit is appreciated, and we will be shouting you out when we actually release the poll, and you will get an early release of the poll for all of those people who have contributed. Now, the third number that's really important that no one's really talking about are the number of undecided voters in these polls. And we see the smallest number of undecided voters in any poll over the last 20 years. So let's go ahead and look at the numbers. And if we can see right now, according to the Real Clear Politics average of the two-way race between, for example, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, we see only 3.8% of the electorate is undecided. But if you look at Joe Biden just 4 years ago, he was at 7.3% with Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton in that election in 2016, 8.2% of the electorate at this exact point were undecided, where 6.5% were undecided in 2012 with Barack Obama. And in 2008, when he ran against John McCain, 8.8% of the electorate was undecided. And with John Kerry, it was 7.3% of the electorate that was undecided, running against the incumbent George Bush. So why is this good? The first reason it's good is if the electorate is starting to solidify, or really solidified compared to other elections, and you're near that 50%, you're in a good range. That means you're not expecting the numbers to move whatsoever. The second reason why is something that we call shy Trump voters when it comes to polling. Now, in many polls in the last two election cycles, there's something known as a shy Trump voter, somebody who doesn't want to tell a pollster they're for Trump, even though they are. And in many of these cases, they usually say undecided. They don't say the Democrat, but they say undecided. So this means in these polls, we are probably seeing a lot less shy Trump voters. And so therefore, when we look at Trump's number, we're basically seeing the ceiling of where he can hit. So we are also seeing in the crosstabs that a lot more people want information about Kamala Harris and stuff. Donald Trump's vote has pretty much solidified in around the 47% mark, right? So Kamala Harris has some, with this 3%, has some room to grow. But most importantly, once we start getting lower and lower into these numbers of undecided, a lot of these people just might not vote. So this even bodes better for Kamala Harris. And if we look at the two-way race, taking out this undecided, she's now over 50%. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to go over to the Electoral College map because, let's be honest, Kamala Harris has a lot less work to do as far as protecting her states compared to Donald Trump. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Kamala Harris's states, then we're going to look at Donald Trump's states and see where the path to victory is, or at least how minimum or maximum their Electoral College maps can look. So let's go ahead and look at Kamala Harris's strong states. Now, this is Kamala Harris's, what I say, solid state map. These are the states that she essentially has to do zero work in, and she is going to win the election. Now, a lot of people might say that Minnesota and Virginia shouldn't be in there, and maybe New Hampshire, but all three of those states, the Trump campaign has pulled out of. They are not targeting them anymore. So that leaves it totally open for Kamala Harris to win those. So if we look at the Democrats, they're already at 225 electoral votes when it comes to their strong states. Now, if we go ahead and look at the places where they're targeting, we see that now equals 319 electoral votes, which gets them obviously over to 270. But we can see here, these are just essentially the swing states that we have been talking about the whole time. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And then I went ahead and threw in that 2nd congressional district in Nebraska. Now, if we look at this map and we see where Democrats are targeting congressional races and U.S. Senate races, we see that the map opens up a little bit more. And this could have some residual effects when it comes to the presidential race. So they have just announced, the DSCC has just announced that they are going to be targeting Texas and Florida. So we can start putting those in there. Ohio, obviously, with Sherrod Brown. We have at least one congressional district in Iowa that is being targeted, possibly two. We'll see what happens there. Possibly three, actually. 3 out of the 4 could be targeted. And then we have the Alaska one, which is being targeted. And both in Alaska and Iowa, there were polls that came out on the same day showing that the presidential race could be a little closer. So the Democrats really have a significant exposure in 415 electoral votes. So as you can see, if we combine the presidential campaign along with DSCC, D-TRIP, DLCC, maybe the Democrats are focusing on some state legislative districts, state house, state senate districts, we see that the Democrats have their fingers in a lot more pies than just what we see on the electoral map. We see them now focusing in Florida, Texas, Iowa. I still say that's a state to watch. Obviously, Sherrod Brown's race in Ohio. If people decide to all of a sudden become straight ticket voters there, then that can have an impact. However, it should be noted that very rarely does a lower race actually impact the higher race. The only thing that might impact it is if Trump people in a certain area think that Trump's going to lose the national election, then that might help at these state levels. But it still shows how much of a reach the Democrats have when it comes to their funding, their campaign message, and everything in this election, covering 415 electoral votes. Now let's go ahead and look at Donald Trump and where he is, where his safe places are and where his targets are. Now, if we look at Trump's solid state map, we do see that this equals 216 electoral votes. Now, just for the sake of argument, I did put Texas, Florida, Iowa, and Alaska in there as far as being states that Trump technically does not have to work in. However, with the polling we've seen in Florida and Texas, these might not necessarily be as solid as we think. So in the other state map that I showed you with the Democrats, where essentially they don't need to do any work, and even the states that were to be close, the Republicans have totally pulled out of, the Democrats are now going on the attack in these other states, which is important. Now, if we look at Trump's target map, we see that it equals 309 electoral votes, and these basically add the 7 swing states that we have been talking about all along. So that's only 10 electoral votes less than Kamala Harris when it comes to her target map. So a few things about these maps that we just talked about. The first one is obviously the Democrats have stronger footholds in the states that are their lock states, which means they have a lot less work to do to get to 270. The Republicans have a lot more work to do to get to 270. They don't have to necessarily run the table, but they nearly have to run the table, where the Democrats really don't, because they have that strong 225 electoral grab. And the second thing, as I mentioned in the Texas and Florida graphic, is that the Republicans might start sweating in some of these states. If all of a sudden the Democrats are going on the attack in Alaska, Iowa, Texas, and Florida, even at the U.S. Senate level or the congressional level, this could actually make those states be put in play and put the Republicans on the defensive. And what does that mean? That means that they might have to pull out of a state like Wisconsin, like Michigan, that they didn't think they'd have to do. So watch out for those. And the second thing you might have noticed is that I didn't put up a target map for U.S. Senate or U.S. House for Donald Trump, as I did with Kamala Harris, talking about where they are targeting certain seats that maybe they could push the presidential vote up. That's because the Republicans don't have any. And in the places where they are really targeting on congressional seats, they're usually in very safe Republican or Democratic states. So there's a number in California that the Republicans are trying to keep control of. That's going to go Democratic. Same thing with New York. They did a lot of changing of the borders in New York. The Republicans are going to try to hold on to those. That, again, is a state that the Republicans are not going to win. So places where the Republicans are actually targeting congressional and Senate races are not in places where they are expected to take a state from the Democrat. If we look at Tester, if we look at If we look at Sherrod Brown in Ohio, these are states that the Republicans already expect to win. So therefore, they're not adding anything to Trump's electoral map at the end of the day, but the Democrats actually are. Now, the last point I want to talk about is the most recent polls that the New York Times did out of Ohio, which was interesting that they polled that, and Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. So let's look at Nebraska first. In that congressional district, you see the Democrats actually doing quite well, and CNN also did a poll as well. This is a seat that is basically considered an even seat, and you've had a Republican incumbent in that seat since, for the last, I think, 4 cycles. Now, of course, there was redistricting and it changed, but overall, the Republicans have always had a slight edge, but it's even. Right now, the polls are showing it not 100% lopsided, but it does show the Democrat in the CNN poll being outside the margin of error when it comes to winning that race. So seeing how Democrats are performing here compared to how they performed 2 years ago shows possibly a significant shift. And when we look at the Ohio poll, we also saw that there was a 6-point gap, which was within the margin of error. To me, this might indicate that the Democrats are solidifying support in the Midwest and what we would call the industrial Midwest, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and so on. So if this is the case, about maybe 3 weeks from now or 2 weeks from now, campaigns are going to have to make tough decisions on which states to target and which states to drop. There might be a point where the Trump campaign will have to finally drop a Michigan or a Wisconsin in order to hold on to, let's say, North Carolina, or to compete in Georgia or Pennsylvania. We will eventually get to that point, and that news will be coming out. These 2 polls from these 2 electorates tell me that the Democrats are solidifying that Midwest, industrial Midwest support. So we'll see what the polls say from this point on. All right, thank you all very much for joining me. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. There just haven't been any polls today because it's a Sunday. I will see you all later. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.